My background, as I was introduced there, is as an editor across the social sciences at Manchester University Press. So I will try to give you the sometimes mysterious publisher's angle on the publishing process and shed a bit of light on it from our perspective. So what we are after in terms of books, as publishers in general, not necessarily just Manchester University Press, and talk about how to put a book proposal together. And I've slightly shoehorned the word creatively into it, but I'll talk about where there are possibilities to be creative in book publishing. And what is very much, it's interesting to have my talk after Sarah's talk because it's a huge contrast really. So talking about zines and their capacity to engage with the community and to be distributed for free and to be collaborative. Book publishing really takes things back into the academy, into the ivory tower really, and for the large part of what academic publishing is, it is for a research audience, for an academic audience. Books are largely produced for academic libraries, but there is some flexibility there. There is scope for producing different kinds of books, and there is scope for some creativity. So I've only got 25 minutes or so I'm going to talk fairly quickly about the nuts and bolts of the publication process. So I'm talking about proposals, the peer review process, and the publication process. And the premise really, the assumption I'm going to make is that I might be talking to people who haven't published that much before, people who are interested in book publishing, and people who might be thinking about publishing their first book. So apologies if those assumptions are completely unfounded and that people are expecting something completely different, but those are the main premises I'm starting with. And then if I've got time, I'm going to get on to how the process can actually be creative. So a lot of the books that we publish, and potentially a lot of the books that you're thinking about, are books based on PhD theses. As an academic publisher, we deal with a lot of these types of books. And this is what I generally give presentations about. So how do you take a thesis that you might want to publish a book from and make that into a book? Now, what I'm hoping for is to distribute some documents to anybody who's interested. So at the end of the presentation is my email address, and drop me a line if you're interested in proposal documents, guidance about specific pointers in turning a thesis into a book, because I've got a document that details that stuff. But I won't go piece by piece through all of that because it'll take ages. The main thing to think about, if that is the situation that you're thinking of, is that a thesis is not a book. And the analogy that we always use is a thesis is a chunky broth. So there are lots of lumps in a thesis that are there for a specific purpose, to aid digestion, for flavor, whatever it might be. But literature review, methods section, theory section, lots of references and footnotes, lots of signposting, chapters with subsections, very, very structured, with lots of lumps in. A book is more like a smooth puree, which has been smoothed out to make for easy reading. And it's very important as a publisher that we emphasize that you can't just publish a thesis as a book. A thesis needs to be smoothed out. Those lumps need to be blended together in a nuanced way to create a book. But there's more detail I can give you on that, but I'm not going to dwell too much on that. But I will talk about proposals, and I can send you a proposal document to illustrate this. And this is really one of the areas where I want to talk about creativity as well. So book publishing starts with a proposal. Particularly academic book publishing, you won't get a book published unless you complete a proposal form first and submit that to a publisher for their consideration. Now, proposals in many ways aren't a place to get too creative. Book publishing, academic book publishing per se, again in massive contrast to zine creating and publishing, is a very traditional, very conservative way of disseminating your research. So, book publishing hasn't fundamentally changed in hundreds of years, and publishers and other academics generally want to see a book that is in the formula of other books. Academic monographs I'm mainly talking about here. So a book proposal is fairly formulaic. Book proposals exist for all academic publishers, and they are slightly different for all academic publishers, but the main ingredients are the same. They're fairly industry standard. And the things we want to know in them, I'll just open one up very quickly. The things we want to know, here we go. So we want to know about the author briefly, but we mainly want to know, you probably can't read this at the back, I'll go through it. What's your proposed title? And we want a 150-word catalogue entry for your book. So we want you to sum up very quickly and clearly what your book is about. We then want more detail about the scope and the content and the purpose of your book. Why are you writing this book? Who's going to read this book? What audience is this book for? What does this add to the literature? And we want to know what the table of contents looks like. Again, I can send this round, so I'm not going to dwell too much on that. But thinking about creativity and how you can maybe make this proposal stand out from the tens or hundreds of other proposals that an editor like me might receive, really comes down to the first section. And I want to think about the book proposal form needs to fulfill two main purposes. So the first purpose is all about the first pair of eyes that will see this proposal, which is the editor who works for a publisher. Now, the editor is not an academic. They may have an academic background, I don't. And I'll be the first person that sees a proposal. And the proposal needs to convince me, the editor, that I want to publish this book. But the second purpose that a book proposal needs to fulfill is that it also needs to convince academics, who I will use as peer reviewers on this book proposal, that this is a rigorous, well-researched, credible piece of work. And that's not necessarily what I need to see, because I'm not an academic. So it's a bit of a balancing act. And this is where we need to think about creativity. And going back to what I said earlier, the book proposal needs to be fairly formulaic in what is presented. People don't want too much creativity in a book proposal. We don't want outlandish ideas. We don't want loads of prose in there, loads of visuals in there. It needs to be fairly boring. But at the same time as that, it needs to grab my attention as an editor, as a non-academic. So how do you get that balancing act? How do you shoehorn that creativity into this? And I think that's really about this opening statement, this 150-word catalogue entry that goes at the top of a book proposal, and also about your title. So if you're putting a book proposal together, thinking about, in the first page of your book proposal, grabbing the attention of the non-academic editor who's going to see it first, but balancing out the words that you use in that to make sure that you maintain academic credibility, that this is going to be a worthy addition to the literature in your field. It's a fine balancing act, but it's a bit of space where you can actually get some creativity in there. You want to grab my attention, you want to make sure I'm intrigued, but you want to maintain your credibility. I don't have the magic formula to do that, but I want to emphasize that that part of the proposal document is probably the most important part of the proposal document, because editors at publishers might receive 100 of these a week and immediately make a snap decision on whether they want to send that to peer reviewers. And you need to grab that attention when you can. Like I said, I'm not going to go through the whole document, but I can send that round to people who are interested, and the forms are very similar for most academic publishers. Just go back to my slides. Okay, so in the proposal, before you get to a proposal, find some proposal forms online, see how they differ, and if you get the opportunity, speak to editors. So if you go to academic conferences or you get an opportunity like today, or you have other opportunities to contact editors, speak to them so you can give them an idea of what you're thinking of. You can get your face, your name known to that editor before just anonymously well, not anonymously, but before sending an email with a book proposal where you're faceless, there's just a proposal. And like I said before, proposals by their nature can be quite boring and formulaic. Try to speak to editors about your idea first. Find proposal forms online and make sure you send the right proposal form to the right editor. I quite often get a Palgrave Macmillan proposal form or a Cambridge University Press proposal form, and that's fine. It gives me the information I want, but it's kind of off-putting because I want people to publish with Manchester. So it needs to convince an editor before it goes to reviewers. How do you convince an editor? So it's getting that creativity in, making sure you write it nicely. You don't want typos in that first section of a proposal form. But you also need to demonstrate that it's a good fit with the publisher's list. So what does that publisher already publish? What do they like? What are they good at? What are they known for? Submit your book proposal to those publishers. Originality and a bold argument. So again, it's a legitimate original addition to the literature, ideally with a strong argument to it. Many books that are published are incremental additions to the literature, which is fine, but it needs bold originality, which will grab my attention. And then balancing that with the academic quality of it. Also, publishers generally want to see broad relevance. Again, thinking about if you've got a PhD thesis that you want to turn into a book, a PhD thesis by its nature is very focused. It's on something quite small, potentially, that in itself might only be of interest to tens or maybe a few hundred people worldwide. How do you broaden that out to make sure that a publisher wants to publish that? So you can broaden that out by thinking about, what methods are you using, what theories are you using, what other subfields that are aligned to your field of interest might be interested in your work. I'll move on a little bit. So you complete your proposal document and you provide some sample material. If you are in the position of having a thesis, you need to make it different. Now again, I've got a document that can tell you how to make it different. But when you put your proposal together, you need to submit some sample material to see that, so we can see that you can write, and so that peer reviewers see that it's good stuff. If you've got chapters from your thesis, don't just submit the original chapters from your thesis, because they will probably be structured in those chunky thesis ways. So rewrite those chapters. Just take them, take out all of those subheadings, take out some of those references if you can, rewrite bits if you can, and resubmit them. So anyway, I get a proposal and some sample material. You've done your job in convincing me that it's interesting, it's original, it's worthy to send to peer reviewers. And then at Manchester University Press, we would send that to a minimum of 2 academic peer reviewers in the field. We would then take their peer reviews. If they're both positive, they would come back to you as the author, and you would respond to those, picking up on all the issues that might have been raised, putting your argument together to say that you will adapt it or you won't adapt it, or you disagree with what they say or you agree with what they say. At a university press, that information is then taken and presented to the university press committee, which is normally made up of academics from that university. At other academic publishers, that might not be the case. It might be a decision just made by the editor. And then a decision is made about whether that publisher wants to publish your book. You then get a contract and you go away and write the full manuscript. And then when you've written the full manuscript, that again is sent to peer reviewers for further peer review. This differs slightly across different publishers. Some people might use fewer or more reviewers. Some publishers, particularly US-based university presses, might ask for a full manuscript in advance before offering a contract. It varies quite a lot. What next in the process? So quickly, after your initial peer review based on your proposal and your sample material, you'll be offered a contract with some terms like the very small amount that you might get paid for writing the book, the submission dates, how long the book needs to be. You then write up your draft manuscript that goes for the peer review. You then get those peer review comments back. You agree dates to write up your final manuscript. That then goes into production. Production can take anywhere from 6 to 12 months, depending on the publisher. And during that production process, you'll be asked to look at proofs, your work will be copy edited, and generally in academic publishing, you will be asked to produce an index, which takes a few days, and it is an annoying and boring job, but is necessary. And then the book's published, and then there is promotion and marketing, which is something that publishers generally want to work with authors on, collaborate on, and talk about how you can reach the right audience for your book. So I've been quite quick there talking through the process of academic publishing, just the step-by-step, what is done. Proposal, peer review, feedback, contracting, draft manuscript, final manuscript, production, publication. Now, the theme of this day is how to present your research creatively, or the theme of this talk is supposed to be. So how can you actually get creative within the confines of academic publishing, which I've presented as something that is a very traditional, very conservative way of disseminating your research? There are ways of doing this. There are different book formats you can aim at. There are different ways that you can incorporate design and visual elements in a book. It doesn't just have to be text. And there are different publishers that you can talk to that might have different flexibility in terms of those formats and those models, the audiences they reach, the type of books they publish. There's activities that you can take on around the actual book publishing that are more creative and that can incorporate your research. And then there are ways of thinking about, well, actually, is a book the best way for me to get this research out there, or are there other things? So I'll quickly touch on each of these. But before I do, there are obstacles to this creativity, and I think this is a really important point, particularly if people are thinking about their first books. So the first point to think about before you touch a proposal form or think of publishers is, what does this book need to do for you? Why are you thinking of publishing a book? Is it about getting a book on your CV, getting academic career progression that you need for your career? How much time do you have to produce this book? Do you need this book? You know, what is the audience that you have in mind? If this is just an academic book that you need to produce to be an academic, what is your audience? It's other academics, so how do you get credibility with that audience? There's also a factor that if you get too creative, you might scare away publishers if you don't have a track record of publishing books already. And there is also the obstacle of imagination. So what is the motivation here? What does the book need to achieve for you will have a real influence on the things I'm going to talk about how you can be creative with different forms of book. So the standard book formats that we publish in and that most academic publishers publish in are monographs, so generally single-authored, single-topic, research-based books. That's the kind of the bread and butter of what a university press publishes and academic publishers publish. They tend to be published first in hardback. They tend to be quite formulaic, text-heavy, research-focused, full of academic jargon. Their audience is a finite research audience. And they are the gold standard of academic credibility, generally. Depending on what discipline you come from, they are what will get you the most points in terms of an academic career is a monograph. There are edited collections, so similar model, but with different contributors contributing different chapters. There are textbooks, which are written for student use for a specific course, tend to be published in paperback, so students can buy them. There are course adoptable books, which is something of a hybrid between a monograph and a textbook, so a book that is maybe research-based but could be used for undergraduate teaching on courses. And then there are possibly the more creative side of things, which are the trade book. So a book that is not designed for an academic audience at all, it's designed for a general audience. Or a crossover book, which is written by an academic, maybe research-based again, but is also designed for a popular audience. So something that aims to get both academic and popular. And again, going back to that, what does this book need to achieve for you? If it's on the academic side of things, the career building side of things, the monographs are probably the most important thing there, but they're also the most constricting in terms of creativity. And the trade books are probably the ones that offer the most creativity in terms of writing style, in terms of visuals, but they may be not what you need in terms of an academic CV. So thinking about what you need to achieve is important. Moving on to visuals. So the monograph itself is quite restrictive, but there are elements where you can get creativity in there. So the cover design. If you're going to write a book, you want the cover to look nice. It's a small point, but it's something you can have influence on. You can have a nice, colourful, visual cover. You can include images in monographs. It depends what your subject is. It depends who the publisher is. Publishers are generally scared of a book costing a lot to produce, and including lots of images can do that. But including black and white images in a text-heavy monograph is actually not that expensive to do. It's something that we're generally quite keen on, and a lot of publishers are. So not thinking that your monograph needs to be entirely text. You can include images in that, and that is a way of being more creative. If your research includes a lot of photography or maybe art history or I don't know, something that lends itself to color images that need high resolution, you can include color plate sections in books. These are possibilities. And increasingly, we're seeing the use of companion websites where you have something more creative, visualizations, maps, photos, videos, whatever it might be, that can't be included in a traditional book, but can be done alongside that book. So there are areas of possibility. Publishers, we vary quite a lot, even just in terms of academic publishers, and the flexibility that we offer varies. The audiences that we serve vary, and the type of book that we publish varies. So the type of audiences that we serve and the type of prices that we charge for books, the number of color images that we include, the flexibility that we offer in terms of cover design, all of these things vary between publishers. And you have a lot of choice out there. You've got small and large publishers, university press publishers, which tend to be small, or big commercial academic publishers. You also could choose between an academic publisher, which could be the commercial or university press, or you could look at a trade publisher or kind of a political activist type publisher, which might offer you more scope in terms of creativity and might offer a larger audience, but again, might be weighed up against that academic credibility point. Different publishers also publish different series, so it's important to think about what you need to achieve from that book. You know, it might be that there is a publisher that you normally wouldn't consider for a book, but they publish a series that's really relevant to you. So thinking about choice of publisher and all of this, I think is, it's a very subjective decision, but talking to colleagues about where they've published, who they respect, and mainly I would say thinking about what you want to achieve for that book, what audience you want to reach with that book. Think about the books that you've read that have been important to you. Who's published those books? Where do you want to see your book? Whose books do you want to see your book alongside on a shelf in a bookshop? Where would you ideally want your book to be published? And all of these things are a factor. So audience, what audience can that publisher reach? Is it just going to go to a UK audience or a library audience? Is the reputation of that publisher right for your academic discipline? Does that publisher have a good reputation in your discipline or a bad reputation? Do you have a good relationship with your editor? That's important because you will be in contact with that editor for potentially a process that could take 2 years. What services do they offer? Will they include color? Will they include plate sections? Will they offer flexibility on the design of the cover? How much marketing support will they offer? And how long will they take to produce things? I think all of these are part of what is often perceived as the mystery of academic publishing. That these are all questions that you can ask an editor if you get an opportunity to meet an editor. And don't be afraid to ask what might seem difficult questions to make sure that you get the right publisher for your book. And so if you end up with a book that doesn't feel as creative as you want it to be, that is restricted by being an academic monograph, for example, what else can you do with your creativity? So talk to a publisher about whether you can have a companion site. Increasingly, people come to me and say, okay, I want academic credibility, I want to write my first monograph, that's important to me, but I have all of these great images that I recorded in my fieldwork, or I have these great interviews on video, or I have these sound clips or this music or whatever it might be that I think adds something alongside this book. Publishers might be prepared to have a companion site, or it might be something that you can put up yourself. Equally, writing blog posts to reach a wider audience and to bring them into the book. So I've written this book that isn't going to be accessible to members of the public, but the research is important. You can write that up in blog form as well. And thinking about promotional activities that might add more. How can you get creative with things? So how can you go out into the community where you did your research and not say, I've got a £90 monograph, would you like to buy it? But here's what we did alongside it, can we share this with you? Here's a zine from this, here's a blog post, here's whatever else it might be. And then finally, I just want to put this maybe not the ideal thing for a book publisher to put there, but maybe a book isn't the right thing for you. Particularly going back to that idea of if you've got a thesis, it doesn't have to be a book. It depends on what discipline you're in, what subfields you're in, what pressures you might feel from your department or for your career. But journal articles are often an attractive way to get that research out there as well. I've put arguably less creative. Journal articles are often seen as even more kind of strict and structured than book publishing, but there is scope for more creative ones. Journalism, getting your work out there through that, and then just today there are sessions. We saw Sarah talking about zines. There was a session on comics, one on graphic novels. These are particularly coming from the social sciences, but we see this across different disciplines as well. Increasingly, there is an interest and a move and a push to say, look, there are traditional models that are hundreds of years old that don't reach the audiences I want to reach. Let's do something a bit different. And I think it's important to consider those either alongside or instead of more traditional publishing.